So welcome this evening to our parent workshop on supporting our young people with challenging behaviour. I'm Dr Beth Mosley, a consultant clinical psychologist working for Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust. I'm the lead of the Psychology in Schools team, and we've been doing workshops all year. We've reached over 5,000 parents with our workshops. So this is a new topic for us, and we're really looking forward to present to you today. I'm going to introduce Annie to you. Do you want to introduce yourself, Annie?
So I'm Annamarie Webster. I'm an advanced clinical nurse practitioner, and I'm the clinical lead for the Countywide ADHD Service in Suffolk.
Wonderful, thank you, Annie. So we're going to co-present today, so we have to kind of bear with us as we chop and change and we add to what each other are saying. So the aim of the session today is to think about why behaviour that challenges, and we've got to be honest with you, this is a huge topic, massive, and it was really difficult to cram it into 60 minutes, and in fact we didn't successfully do that earlier on today. It took an hour and 20, so we've had to take out a small section to make it fit in today. We're going to think with you about behaviour, why it's challenging, and then we're going to think about some ways that you can get a better understanding of that. We're going to use the ABC strategy. We're going to help you think about what's happening in your child's brain, and we're going to then move on to explore how we can support our young people with skills development, setting our children up for success, and kind of doing that in a compassionate way as possible. And what we importantly want to share with you today is resources and signposting. So the idea of today is that it's going to hopefully wet your whistle. It's going to make you curious. It's going to help you hopefully have some ideas about things you maybe haven't tried before, and think, oh, I'm going to look into that a bit more. So it's not going to be the answer for everything, but we're hoping we're going to signpost you to enough resources following today that if anything's taken your interest in particular, you'll be able to follow that up. So yeah, let's get on with thinking about the behaviours that you see in your child that concern you and have brought you here today. And you know, you may well have been to quite a few sessions on managing behaviour that challenges, because it's not just challenging for you as parents, it's challenging for lots of different people in your young person's life. So let's have a think about what behaviours actually are concerning you and your child that are bringing you here to this session today. And thank you again for committing an hour of your time to this session, because we know that time is precious, particularly at this time of night, and obviously this can be a clinch point for families or a pinch point for families at 6 o'clock dinner time. So thank you very much for committing to get here. So we've got aggression, physical violence, anger, anxiety, struggling with listening and concentration. Again, physical aggression, withdrawal into computer games, so kind of that hyper focus, and finding it difficult to get off computer games, I should think. So back chat, yeah, violent outbursts, struggling with transitions, again, anger and aggression, this and kind of the violent behaviour. So hitting, I presume that could be hitting you as a parent, it could be hitting siblings, it could be hurting themselves. So head banging, throwing himself against doors, finding it difficult to accept the consequences of behaviour. And that's so difficult, isn't it? Because your young person's in distress, and then you're having to make them kind of accountable for the behaviour and understand the behaviour is not acceptable. But that can feel really difficult as a parent. Again, defiance, lack of self-care, struggling with transition and noise in all settings. So for many of you on this call, your young person may have had a diagnosis of an ADHD or autism spectrum condition, or some other learning difficulty which may affect issues around sensory overload, kind of struggles around fixations on particular topics, black and white thinking, running away, fighting with siblings. So loads here. We've got loads from you. We're gonna move on to the next slide. Sensory overload, absolutely. So there's lots of you here have got the same challenges in common. How do these behaviours make you feel as a parent? So where do they leave you? So how does it feel when your child is behaving like this? Helpless, stressed, frustrated. Absolutely. Yeah, what can I do? A sense of distress yourself and hopelessness. That again, that feeling of powerlessness, feeling like a victim to your child. Sometimes you can feel bullied by your child, you can feel manipulated by your child. It can feel like you've lost control as a parent, not knowing what to do, how to respond, feeling sad, feeling scared yourself, questioning yourself, am I doing the right thing? How am I contributing to this? Feeling judged, not knowing how to fix things. And it's so difficult when you're a parent and you're feeling these feelings of failure and not knowing the answers. It kind of is the stuff that keeps you feeling struggling with getting to sleep at night, and when you're facing the beginning of a day, and you're not sure what's ahead of you, it's those feelings that make the day ahead feel so difficult. What about your child? How do these behaviours make your child feel? For those children who might be having those violent outbursts, who might be aggressive, who might be back chatting, who might be not complying with instructions, or generating arguments. How do you think your child feels after they've done these behaviours, or even during them? So sad, anger, overwhelmed, out of control, confused, anxious and scared and out of control, not heard, isolating, again confused, sad and guilty, stressed and unable to cope or communicate. And I think some parents mentioned earlier that sense of shame, feeling really ashamed of their behaviour and how to kind of recover it. Are relationships with mom or dad repairable after I've behaved like this? Feeling that they're naughty as children, and I guess that feeling of feeling bad and feeling lonely, overwhelmed, disconnected. So really strong feelings, and some of these feelings mirror your own feelings that you feel as a parent when your children are behaving in this way. Some young people might forget what they've done. Some young people, they have the massive explosion, they cause absolute chaos, and then they carry on with their day as if it never happened, and everybody's left reeling in shock and feeling depleted, and the young person seems to be kind of not really have appreciated the impact of their behavior on those around them. Really helpful. Thank you so much for those who are contributing. It's really helpful. So how does this affect your family life? How does this affect school life? How does it make things difficult for you as a family? How do you see this as having an impact on you as a family or on school? So your young person may not want to do work. So I'm not sure if that means you as a parent are reluctant to do work, or your young person's reluctant to do work at school, feeling isolated as a family. So a young person who masks it at school, but it all comes out when the young person gets home, making it difficult to do anything, plan anything, go away, go out for the day, taking a lot of attention from their siblings. It makes it really hard for siblings. For the young person, they're unable to focus on tasks, worry about them getting their work done, getting homework done, feeling behind in school, losing confidence, feeling like the family's falling apart. No one feels good after an outburst, and that's really clear, isn't it, from what everybody's describing? Your young person's feeling terrible, you as a parent are feeling terrible, and the other family members are really struggling with that as well. And another young person who really at school they're managing, but when they get home it's kind of like they let everything out, and that's where you kind of have to pick up the pieces. So it can affect special occasions. So those times that you're really wanting to celebrate as a family can feel like you're feeling anxious about those events. And that's really tough, isn't it? Because that kind of adds to how highly emotive and triggering some of these behaviors can be. Because obviously, if you want to look forward to something and your young person is making that impossible, then you're going to be walking on eggshells, aren't you? And all these special occasions. Tired, outbursts at school difficult to manage, and someone who feels there's something wrong with them, and that's so tough, isn't it, for a young person to feel like that. And as a parent, you are kind of trying very hard not to upset the balance when things are okay. And if you're a parent who struggles to kind of find and understand what a trigger might be for a young person, that can be really, really difficult, can't it? And some things are unavoidable. We need young people to do things sometimes. So it becomes really tricky, doesn't it? Because often we stop asking our children to do things that we know are important for them to do, like help out around the home, because of the problems it's going to create. Not being able to have time with friends, so this is really affecting relationships with other people, isn't it? And the opportunity to build successful relationships with other people. So this is incredibly tough stuff. And that's why you're all here today, I guess, because you're looking for some help and support and guidance. And often it's very difficult to get that help and support and guidance from specialist services. Okay, we're going to move on now. I'm going to hand over to Annie, who's going to kind of give a definition of challenging behaviour and start to think about the meaning behind behaviour.
Off mute, that would be helpful to take myself off mute, and I can, I really kind of found what you're talking about quite moving. It is a really tricky topic, and I think it is very confusing for both yourselves and for your young people. But essentially, the kind of defining thinking behind and context behind challenging behaviour is it's described as a behaviour it's got of such intensity and frequency and duration that it really impacts on the quality of life. And we never work with one person, we work with families. So those behaviours do essentially impact on everybody living within a household and maybe at school. And that's very difficult for you to manage as parents. Because the responses to that are often restrictive or aversive, and they can lead to people being excluded from school. They can lead to, as you quite rightly said, not wanting to go out as a family, not enabling your child then to experience that richness of those social interactions. So it's a very, very difficult predicament for families to find themselves in. So which of these behaviours occur at home or school in the context of your own young person? We could use a Slido to have a vote on those. So quite a lot of school refusal behaviours coming up on the screen, which is a really tricky one for families, because there is an expectation in this country that we, as parents, we have a responsibility to get our children to school. So that adds to the pressure, doesn't it, for families, really, in those morning times when things can be quite difficult and be those pinch points when you're having to get children ready. You've got a lot to do and a lot to manage in a short period of time.
And I think often, it's when you ask your child to do something or to be cooperative, those uncooperative refusal behaviours are just really, really challenging, aren't they? That seem to be something that's for the majority of the audience a key area of difficulty, including shouting and screaming. This actually very much fits with the audience earlier on today, that the refusal behaviours and shouting and screaming were the kind of most frequent behaviours in the group of young people. And the context we'll probably think about later is why might that happen? What might your child be saying when they behave in their school refusal and the behaviours they're employing to avoid going to school? I think we'll look at that a bit later, won't we, Beth? So if we think about what's the behaviour we see and what's underpinning that behaviour, we kind of use this iceberg analogy, because children need an awful lot of support and guidance when they're growing, and particularly we're looking at the age group this evening, 6 to 10. So when we are in the context of that difficult behaviour, it's you will respond to what you see. But not necessarily what's going on for the young person. So underneath those behaviours, there may be a range of complexity. Your young person may be confused about their own behaviour. They may be communicating that they feel sad. They may have had a loss. They may have had a lived experience that they can't move on from. They may have difficulties with their everyday function because they have an underlying condition such as ADHD or ASD, and that maybe hasn't been unpacked sufficiently, so they haven't
been supported to develop other ways to communicate their difficulties. So Beth mentioned earlier on about black and white thinking, and often young people with those difficulties live in the moment, and when things change very rapidly and they're not supported with that change, that can often be a trigger point for behaviours, for difficult behaviours. So the young person's emotional state will drive their behaviours and their response to things around them and in their environment. So what you're seeing is the end point of something. The behaviour is the communication of what's going on, not necessarily the cause. And it's really often people start to develop the sense of that the behaviour is the person, and what we try and do is separate that the young person isn't defined by the behaviour they're displaying. What that is a communication that something is going on for them that we've yet to really drill into. So they haven't really established yet the support that they need to develop different behaviours. And for you, that's very challenging. And earlier on, there was a lot about you as parents who were confused. And I think as parents, when you're anticipating you're with that big bump, that young child, you don't anticipate that you're going to be challenged by your child, and it's a very difficult concept for everybody to understand. So we, in our world, think about the purpose of behaviour and the function of the behaviour. So is that behaviour enabling the child to access something they need or want? Is it enabling your child to avoid or escape something they're struggling with? So we had earlier on today, I think, didn't we, Beth, the analogy of a maths lesson. If your child's maths lesson is on a Tuesday and they really struggle with maths, and it feeds into their sense of poor self-esteem and low self-worth, they're going to use strategies to avoid that day, or that they might be anxious at the point that they're getting ready that day for school. So that's going to feed into that. So that is an internal struggle that maybe they're struggling to articulate. There may be some sensory issues going on for the child. So, the school environment may be quite overwhelming. If we think about primary classrooms in particular for your age group, they're very colourful places because they're made to be cheery, but often for a young person who's got sensory difficulties, they're quite overloading and overwhelming. So again, it's thinking about what is the nature of that behaviour and what purpose is it serving for the young person. So could you give an example of something your child might be avoiding with a difficult behaviour? Have a little think about that.
So this might be helpful to think of, recent behaviours that you've experienced in your child. It could have been this morning, it could have been over the weekend. Just think of what you think that your young person might be trying to avoid with that behaviour. So going to school again, and bedtime. So going to bed on time. School again, having to switch the TV off. So trying to stop the TV being switched off. A lot of going to bed, a lot of to do with school and classwork is really important. Again, transitions. So are they avoiding the transition from something they're enjoying to something they enjoy less, or just any transition? So that person, it might be any transition. So they're avoiding looking stupid, avoiding homework, bedtime, having to shower. And I think the key thing here is, kids go to school 5 days a week, bedtime's every day. The frequency and the predictability of these behaviours are daily, aren't they? It sounds like for you, these are not going to be once in a blue moon things. They're going to be daily events. And if you've got a young person who doesn't want to go to school and also doesn't want to go to bed, you're dealing with this terrible dynamic of the mornings being incredibly pressured and stressful, and the bedtime being difficult too. So you as a parent are incredibly drained from having to manage the morning and the evenings.
But it's also that anticipatory anxiety that the whole household then, evening's coming, it's going to be difficult. How are we going to manage today? I think that sense of dread is quite difficult, isn't it? Yeah, so working up aggressive, not being near me, so going to bed when I'm still downstairs. So that came up quite a lot this morning about people not wanting to be separated from their parents. That feeds into anxiety, which then leads to a behaviour, and that avoidance behaviour of going to bed. Yeah. And completing schoolwork. And schoolwork is a really tricky one because there's a lot of pressure for our children to learn independently, but it can become a pitched battle, can't it, when people are kind of, you're under pressure for your child to get their spellings done, but actually your child's saying, no, I don't want to do that, I don't want to engage in that. Really tricky.
Okay, so our next thing is we're going to think about, can you give an example of something your child might want or need when they have difficult behaviour? So again, moving away from what they're trying not to do or that they're trying to get away from, and think about what they might be needing or wanting. What's that difficult behaviour communicating about what they need or want? Okay, so for some young people, it's going to be hunger, food, and we know when babies are born, that's their survival mechanism, isn't it? Crying is the way to let their parent know that they need food. So looking for reassurance, looking for help to complete a task, trying to get some time with mom or just time and support, trying to get some attention or food, feeling to kind of feel safe, valued, validated. A young person who might be confused is trying to reach out to get something from a parent. Again, generally wanting mom, feeling overstimulated, so needing some respite. We had earlier on people talking about young people wanting space. Someone here has mentioned one-to-one time alone. So again, it's important to bear in mind that you are experts in your children and your family life and the day and all the pressures that each unique family has. You know, we all have different kind of level of family members. We all have different levels of support within our family to help us parent, and different spaces within our family home. And so unique to you and your child is going to be what they're looking for in that moment. So if you were in a particularly busy household, your young person might have challenging behavior at a time that they need some protected space or some time with you, or a sense of feeling like they're not out of control. Okay. And someone's put here that they've got older siblings who might be staying up later, so they're trying to get some time with you, or there's a lot of thinking about the impact on siblings and sometimes feeling like it's not fair what siblings get compared to them potentially. So what might your child be struggling with internally when they behave difficultly? So just thinking about what's the internal struggle, what are the feelings your young person is experiencing when they're behaving difficulty. And I know you talked about this earlier in terms of what they feel after the behavior, but what about what they're feeling during the behavior, and what maybe triggers the behavior? So what is it that's leading to the behavior? What's the feeling that comes first and then the behavior follows? So we've got anxiety here. Anxiety again, frustrating, so finding it really difficult to complete a task. That might be very much so with homework. So a feeling of rage inside, so anger, feelings of panic, loss of control, actually frustration again, because they're not able to communicate what they actually need. Might be feeling judged, so feeling a degree of kind of humiliation and shame, and they're having to kind of like their responses in relation to that. Feeling like that they're doubting themselves, perhaps a bit jealous about what's going on with another sibling, that frustration again, and confusion about others. So lots of really strong feelings. And actually, it's really interesting again, many of these feelings are the feelings that then happen in the other family members or the other adults who might experience this, even if it's at school as well. It will be hard. It's hard for those around you to not then feel these feelings too, because it's really scary and it's really distressing and sad to see a young person in distress and creating hurt to themselves or others. And this kind of feeling of blaming themselves and self-loathing. So lots of really negative feelings. Right, this is the last question for us before we're going to move on and give you some content. It's really important to think about what's the outcome of the difficult behaviour. So what does your child get in response to these difficult behaviours? Now, be really honest here. You know, does your child get to avoid some of the things that they don't want to do? So they do get a consequence. So the consequence, is that a planned consequence? So you're going to have a consequence because of that behavior, or is that the consequence of their behavior, which is other distressed family members or an older sibling punching them back? So, okay, quite often it's attention. And one of the things we know is that any attention, even if it's particularly negative, is valued by a young person. And my daughter, she hates it when I talk about her in these sessions, but compared to my son, she's much more benefits from attention, and she always is quite open, and she's a bit older now, but she would always say, I don't care whether it's positive or negative, I just want the attention. But some young people, especially at age 6 to 10, aren't necessarily going to be kind of able to have that insight that actually that even the really difficult negative attention feels better than no attention at all. It dominates the environment. It can feel like it's really taking control. You can all feel really held hostage. Sometimes they get their own way. Sometimes you will listen to a young person, and quite often when our young people are quietly busy doing kind of positive or behaviors that don't get in the way, we just leave them to it. And sometimes we're scared to notice that they're doing something nicely, because then we're scared of distracting them away from those good behaviors. So power, somebody's put here, so a sense of feeling in control and having a degree of power. And someone here has put obviously the consequence of their behavior when they've made the wrong choice and understand why. And I think we're really thinking about the timing of that, because quite often when we have a young person who's behaving in a really difficult way, we might feel inclined to talk to them about their difficult behavior in that moment, or talk about the consequences of behavior. And we know typically that can actually lead to an escalation of those difficulties, and that often thinking about consequences of behavior and having those discussions around choices is very important to do when you're further away from the event happening and your young person is more settled, not during the time that they're in that state of being dysregulated. And we'll talk a little bit about the brain house later on, and why fundamentally the brain doesn't benefit from us reminding children what consequences are when they are in that full-blown outburst.
There's a good example there just come up, Beth, that we end up telling him off and get something taken off him, and that fuels the frustration. So that's a really good example of what Beth was just talking about. And the control and power thing is also interesting, because often children want to exert control because they're feeling unsafe, and that by controlling the environment, it makes them feel safe. So again, it's thinking about what's that behavior telling us in terms of what's going on for that young person, and that's the kind of thing we would be looking at.
And again, that avoiding doing something that they really don't want to do. And the challenge with this behavior cycle is that young people are kind of learning that their behavior is resulting in a particular outcome, and sadly that outcome for the young person isn't giving them the opportunity to experience success, isn't giving them the skills to kind of know how to communicate better, it isn't giving them the opportunity to do something they find difficult and find out they can do it and build their confidence. So we know for a lot of young people, the impact of these behaviors are very significant in the home environment, at school, and within relationships. And that can really have an impact on a young person's sense of self and self-esteem, because they are in this cycle of feeling caught up with that negative energy, because it's really, really difficult to not feel distressed as a family member around a young person who's also in distress. The outcome for the family is often that we can't do things that we would have liked to have otherwise done, because we can't trust that this is going to go well. And again, that it can make it really difficult, not just with young people's relationships with other adults, but also their relationships with peers. Because if they're struggling to tolerate frustration, and they're struggling to be adaptable, or they're really struggling to communicate within their peer group, then they're going to have similar experiences of their peers being confused and scared and finding it really difficult to have a relationship with them. So the impact of their behavior is largely really quite negative and destructive. And actually for you and for your children must be feeling really overwhelming. And you are here because you're looking for answers, and you're looking to make sense of it. Because if our children are struggling to communicate what's going on, and we know our children best, and we're still struggling ourselves to work it out, then that often is the time that we need some tools to help us really. So that's where it brings us on to the ABC chart. Would you like to talk through this, Annie?
Yeah, so this is a really good method for really trying to identify what's driving some of the behaviours, and I've used this for many years. So essentially, you are recording what you see in terms of your child's behaviour, what's happening, the precursor to that, what's going on, what you're actually seeing, and the consequence of that behaviour, what happens afterwards. And what we start to see is a pattern and picture of what the functions of those behaviours are. So particularly, we've talked a lot about morning times. Is behaviour every day at the same time as you're packing their bag and getting ready for school and saying, come on, we're going to get in the car now? Is it when you're saying to a young person, right, you've had enough screen time now it's time to get ready for bed? So we start to see over time some distinct patterns of those behaviours. And I think it goes back to something that I said earlier, that you start to then detract from the person being of the problem and really starting to look at, well, what is the function of that behaviour? What is that behaviour doing for that young person? What's the message that it's conveying in terms of what they're feeling and how they're managing themselves? So you look at those negative behaviours and start to make sense of them. Once you've done that, there's less confusion, because you can start to think about strategies and ways of managing those behaviours, making sense of those behaviours. So we would then help, you can then put in supportive strategies, which we can talk about again a little later, that mean that the impact of those behaviours is less, and the negative sense of self that's been built up around those behaviours is less.
And I think one of these things that it helps you do as a parent is get a little bit of distance between what's happening in the moment and your emotions, really, because when you're caught up in the dynamic of managing and responding to a young person, and this is always going to be when you're pushed for time, when you're trying to get out the door, when you've got other young people to manage, you might have to get yourself to work, you're going to have a huge range of competing demands as a parent. And in the moment that your child perhaps becomes difficult and you've kind of got that dreaded feeling, oh no, here we go, you're caught up emotionally with what's going on, and actually you're sometimes missing some of the elements of the behavior or some of the clues and signs that the build up, you're even maybe ignoring them a little bit because you kind of don't want to have to deal with this. And quite often, sometimes just in the moment, the consequences can inadvertently reinforce that behavior. And I guess, that's what it is to be human. That's what it's like to be a really busy parent who's just at the, being stretched to your limit. But this is kind of a helpful way of giving you a bit of distance, starting to recognize those patterns. If there's more than one adult in the household, you can look at that together and you can think constructively together. Again, it's kind of trying to kind of adopt this curiosity about what's going on in your family. You're not looking to blame anyone or hold anyone responsible. You just want to kind of unpick it a little bit. And that's what helps us as professionals do this so much more easily and support you to do it, because we're not emotionally connected to you and your family in the situation we're in. And, I'm a parent myself, and I'm making all sorts of parenting mistakes. I'm shouting, I'm getting caught up with the dynamic. I'm doing all the things I say to parents, try to avoid doing that. I'm doing them all the time because I'm in that lived moment. I'm emotional, I'm tired, I've had enough. I think my child should be able to do this. They did this last week, why can't they do it now? So, these are the kind of things that we get caught up with. But we know that many of the problems you're facing as parents are happening on a daily basis. They're predictable problems. So this, in a sense, if you can choose one or two problem behaviors, just gives you the opportunity to look at it in a different way, a bit like a detective, so that you can not only do this for yourself with another adult in the household, but you can also include your child in making sense of this when things are calm. If your child is a bit older, you can do some problem solving. Can you help me make sense of this? But again, if you're adopting that calm and curious approach because you're doing it outside the stressful moment, then you can have those kind of conversations in a way that will maybe be more helpful helpful for you as a family to feel like you're kind of being able to create a safe space to be able to talk about some of these challenges and find some solutions. And for your young person, if they're old enough and they can understand, they can actually take an interest and offer some solutions and ideas to help you think about how you can kind of manage the different parts of the A, B, and C.
And it's a bit like a lens. It's a bit like when I wear glasses and I take them off, I can't see very well. So it is that lens to look at something that you might not have looked at before, because when you've written it down, it's something tangible you can see. And I think it's really a helpful process.
Great. So now we're going to move on to thinking about the brain house. Now, I'm not going to cover this in masses of detail because we do cover this in the majority of our workshops, actually. But really, when we're thinking about our children growing up into adults, we have a huge task ahead of us, really, which is to support our children's developing brains so that they can get to the point that they're well-regulated adults who can organize themselves, hopefully have a job, make a contribution, bring up a family themselves, drive a car, get from A to B, get the shopping, and hopefully make a contribution into their family life, to their society, to communities. And in order to do that, our children who are born with what we could describe as the downstairs brain, which is essentially your kind of alarm system. So that in your downstairs brain is all your flight, fight, freeze response, your emotional brain, it's your instinctual brain. That's very well developed when you're born as a newborn baby. And all of the work that happens in the next 20 odd years, because adolescence goes up into early 20s, would you believe, happens in this upstairs brain. And essentially what we do is we're trying to, as our children develop and grow, is build strong connections between the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain. So the upstairs brain actually does sit at the front of our head. It's where all of our planning, organizing, problem solving, our ability to be flexible, our ability to kind of communicate and turn feelings into words, that connection is that staircase. And that's what enables us to grow into more responsible young teenagers, hopefully, and then adulthood. And our task really as parents is to support this development. And what we know is that when our downstairs brain gets fired off, when we get distressed, when our emotion takes over, or flight, fight, freeze, so anxiety or stress takes over, we literally, our brain, our upstairs brain stops working. It flips the lid. We use the expression flips the lid. It's no longer connected, the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain. And this is literally true. The neural pathways are no longer communicating with one another. And your young person is in flight, fight, or freeze mode. So when your young person is presenting with that very challenging behavior, particularly if it's aggression, it's going to be very much in that fight mode. It's in a fight for survival. At that moment in time, your child cannot hear you. They can't make sense of what you're saying. They're not listening to you because the brain is designed to take action when you're in flight, fight, freeze to make sure you don't die. So what that young person's brain is doing is taking that kind of action, which is very difficult. And what we really are trying to support young people to do is to get re-regulated as quickly as possible, to flip that lid right back down, to kind of pull that connection back in line so that they can feel more in control of their emotions, that they can start to calm themselves down, that they know that actually they're not under threat, something terrible isn't going to happen, they're just feeling distressed because they're feeling anxious or worried, or they can't communicate because they're frustrated. So we cover this in more detail in our other workshops that we've got links to for you. One particularly be really great for you to watch is to do with managing big feelings, and that very much comes under the kind of managing difficult behavior, but it's a slightly different take on it. So I guess what we want to think with you today about is kind of having that sense of, my child has flipped their lid, and being aware ourselves of when we're flipping our lid, because we flip our lids too. And in those moments, we're more likely to kind of add to our child's lid staying in the flipped position. We know that the way to most quickly help our children get their lid back online is to connect with them, for them to feel connected and heard and understood. And that is probably the most difficult thing to do for you when your child is behaving in a particular way that actually you don't even want to be near them, or you want to get very cross with them and get them out of this state. And so often we can get stuck in a cycle where our young people are flipping their lid, and then all the other family members' lids are flipping as well. And that sense of feeling out of control and feeling scared. And of course, if that's happening, lids are going to stay flipped for longer. We're going to be able to struggle to get people back to a regulated state as well. So this is just a really helpful analogy, and it's helpful for you as a parent to recognize, oh, I'm began to flip my lid. It's going to be really difficult for me to give my child what they need right now.
And it's about emotional safety, isn't it, Beth? But at that time, often you can go into long explanations with your child about what their behaviour is doing and how that's impacting. But actually, that trying to get that lid back is keeping your child emotionally safe so they can regulate themselves again. And so that space and time and enabling process is going to be much more effective.
So the key thing is to think about some of the things we're going to talk about now around kind of strategies for supporting our children to develop skills in in the upstairs brain, is making sure that you recognize when your child is in a good place to have some of these conversations, is in a good place to enjoy quality time with you. So that you are more likely to have an experience of success with trying some of these strategies. So one of the things that happens in the upstairs brain, a really important thing that develops as young people go from sort of age 10 up into adolescence, is this thing we call executive functioning. It's a really fancy term, but basically it's the brain's ability to complete everyday tasks and achieve long-term goals. And it actually requires all of these elements. And the reason we're introducing this today, and we know for some of you on this call that you may have a young person who's neurotypically diverse, so they may really struggle with some of these areas of executive development and functioning. And all of our children grow at different rates in this area. And so what we might be seeing with some young people who are struggling with challenging behaviour is that their executive functioning is perhaps just a bit sluggish. And what we're trying to help you think about today is, how can we help our young people develop skills in this area, rather than getting stuck in this cycle where they're just feeling that the only way that they can kind of get what they need is through the more difficult behavior. So this executive functioning is looking at controlling impulses, thinking before acting. And again, we know for young people who might have a diagnosis of ADHD, that's a real struggle. Emotional control, keeping those feelings in check, flexible thinking, so adjusting our behavior to unexpected changes, working memory, so just keeping information in mind while using it, really difficult task we take so for granted. Self-monitoring, so having that ability to kind of be aware of what you're doing in the moment and the impact on other people. And again, this is something you may notice your young person really struggles with. Skills around planning and prioritizing to set those and meet those goals. And of course, if we're thinking about schoolwork and some of the challenges of even just tidying your bedroom or getting ready for school in the morning, quite often requires the ability to plan and prioritize. So if this is a real weakness for your young person in that part of their brain development, then it's going to be something that they're going to struggle with more. Starting a task, we often hear about starting homework is really, really difficult. And taking action to get those tasks started. And then, of course, if we're looking at the planning and prioritizing, being able to finish and follow through, and organization. So those skills about keeping things on track, both physically and mentally. And so we're looking at executive functioning as a task of childhood and going into adulthood. It's a big task. So we're on this journey with our young people, and we know that to become successful adults, developing skills in all of these areas is going to be really important, because it's going to be the bits and pieces that put together being able to get daily tasks done, be able to have relationships with other young people and adults and their peers. So if you think about your young person, they are, depending what age they are, they're developing these skills. And for so many of you on this call, this is going to be a current challenge for them. So we're just going to introduce you to the idea from Stuart Ablon, who's very much looking at thinking about kids do well if they can, rather than kids do well if they want to. He really focuses, he does a really quick 20-minute TED talk and talks about a deficit of skill, not will. A lot of our kind of behavior management programs, the way that we rely on obedience, is very much driven by the notion that kids are making a choice about whether they're going to be cooperative or helpful or not, rather than that they actually are in a situation where they don't know how to, or they might not have the skill to do certain things. So based on this notion, it really is an approach which looks at kind of, rather than working on a young person's will, is working on their skill and helping support them with skills development in these key areas that we just talked about on the last slide. And with this approach, it's very much about being proactive, to think preventatively about difficult behaviors, and doing some role modeling around that. Because what we know is, for all young people, you know, as they're going through and getting older, some of the skills that they're building up is the ability to problem solve, the ability to frustrate tolerance, and the ability to be adaptable. If you think about a 2-year-old, they're all things that they will struggle to do on their own. What happens is, as our children get older, our expectations grow that, well, they're 12, they should be able to solve that problem, they should be able to tolerate that, and they should be able to be flexible. But this moves away from the idea of should, and moves towards thinking about, where is my child struggling, and what support do they need to help them in that area that might be difficult for them? And what this does is it moves away from that feeling of blame, moving away from that sense of you know, well, my child can't just sit down in a maths lesson and get on with the work. Instead, it's recognizing that actually for your child, sitting down in a maths lesson and getting on with the work is a much bigger challenge than it is for the child sitting next to them, because they really struggle with planning and organization and being able to self-monitor and those types of things. So actually what we're trying to, what we're giving permission to you as parents to do, is actually recognize and reward some of the behaviors that you might previously just think of things your child should be able to do. Sit still for 5 minutes. And so you're providing more opportunities to acknowledge actually sitting still for 5 minutes in a maths lesson where you're feeling like you can't quite track what's going on is a massive achievement. Well done, you. And the value of that is that young people start to actually get the recognition and reward they deserve, rather than feeling like they're the kind of young person in the class who isn't kind of recognized for how much harder a task might be. And if you've got more than one sibling, you'll know that some of your young children in the family, doing certain tasks like getting themselves dressed in the morning or organizing their school bag comes really easily. In fact, one of your children might really love it and enjoy it. I've got one child who's massively organized and really enjoys that task. But for another child in my family, actually self-organization actually just makes them feel anxious and worried. They struggle to plan and organize. So when they successfully pack their school bag, there's something about saying, wow, you might have needed more help to get to the point of successfully packing your school bag, but B, brilliant. Whereas it can be difficult balancing that when you've got siblings, because I think sometimes my daughter might say, well, that's unfair, you're giving him way more credit than me, I do this every day and they're getting special attention. So but I think it's about understanding your children and understanding the value of positive feedback and the experience of success.
I think also you then start to feel more successful as a parent, because if you're noticing your child's achievements, and it might be just that they've got their own socks on for a week, then you're actually feeling success and you're feeling their success. So that makes you feel more positive as a parent.
So we're going to ask you a bit of a question here. Some of the things that we might do as parents. Do we find ourselves giving our young people a series of instructions, assuming that expectations are understood? So kind of asking our children to do something, or actually just when they're misbehaving, kind of making the assumption, for goodness sake, you know, these are the expectations. Calling things out from a distance. Oh my goodness, this is what I do all the time. Get down here now. Bring this here. Rah, rah, rah.
I live in a 3-story house, so it's up, down. Yeah.
Transitioning without warning, something these are all things that we're doing as parents all the time. You know, oh my God, have you seen the time? Get off that PlayStation. I've told you a million times. And you're shouting that and giving a series of instructions. Get your shoes on and grab your bag, and you need your coat, and make sure you lock the back door. So these are the things that happen in busy houses all of the time. And again, if we've got a young person who's developing those executive functioning skills, who might be struggling in that area, who might have sensory needs, these things are going to be really tricky, because of course they're going to kind of flag up areas for that young person where they've not quite nailed that part of their development. So inadvertently, within the rush and chaos of family life, we're often doing things that assume that our kids have some of the skills that they might not yet have developed. So we can fall into traps as parents so easily. It's just part of what happens in a busy family life. So we talked earlier about negative attention. Often young people are looking for some kind of attention or some kind of help, but we're very busy, we're consumed with what we're doing, or we're doing something with another sibling, or we're making dinner, or we're just trying to go to the toilet, and actually our child needs us for some reason or another, and they end up getting that negative attention, but they get the attention, and often our children work out the most effective ways to get our attention. Delayed consequences. How many times have you said, right, you're doing that, so you're going to end up, this is going to happen? And my children now say, well, that's never going to happen, Mom. So not tending to be able to follow through. Disproportionate consequences. How many times has it happened that you have been, you know, kind of, you've just had enough at the end of the day, and somebody does one small thing and you're like, that's it, this is happening, you're all going to bed early, or that's it, no more Xbox for a week. I mean,
I like to call that chucking in a grenade. So that chuck is much better to your child to know, in the event you do this, this will happen, and negotiate that. Once you chuck in a grenade and then you add another one, so, and you're not going out this weekend, like a problem, because we then we're out of control, and so you load it on and it becomes completely disproportionate.
And the fact is, you know, we're angry, we're frustrated, we're at our loose end, and we're desperate. But most of the time, we know these approaches are not working, because what we're seeing is a continuation of these behaviours. So we kind of get stuck as parents in part of the loop. Our children's behaviour aren't getting their needs met, and actually, the way that we're responding to our children's behaviour is not getting our needs met as parents. So we're kind of in a lose-lose situation. And doing it for our children, I know this happens all the time. And of course, this is a spectrum, you know, we're all going to do some of these things some of the time. I guess it's trying to move towards having opportunities for it to not be the majority of the time. Doing it for them, you know, how many times do you kind of think, right, I really could do with somebody unstacking the dishwasher, or putting that game away, or tidying that up, and you just think, oh, you know what, it's much easier just to do it myself. And again, of course, our children do learn that if their difficult behavior can help them do some of the boring tasks in life. And, you know, boredom and doing tasks that don't feel that important to children often can be a reason that some of their behavior is difficult, because they just simply don't want to do that behavior because it's boring, or because it doesn't make sense to them. But again, what we're trying to move towards is scaffold our children towards success. So these kind of situations we find ourselves lead us to all feeling failed and not feeling good at the end of the day. And this is a really nice book. I'll just move our picture so that you can see the name of the author. So Noelle Janice Norton, and it's kind of, if you like reading, and it's an audio book as well, it just kind of gives some really concrete tips, and it's helpful for any young person regardless of their developmental needs. So really what Noelle talks about is helping us as parents kind of think about, how do we support our young people to develop the skills that they need? How do we encourage them to kind of have more opportunities for experiencing success and feeling positive, and getting that positive attention, because we do spend a huge amount of energy as parents with these other behaviors that do not result in us the best outcome for all of us, and our children are too investing a lot of energy in these negative behaviors. So she kind of gives some ideas around thinking about planning so that things go right rather than reacting when things go wrong. And again, the Stuart also talks about, these are predictable problems. How can we ensure that our rules and expectations are clear in our family? Do we have clear rules and expectations? We might feel like we do because in the moment we're shouting, you don't do this, that we know that people aren't allowed to jump in furniture in a house. We know people don't hit one another in our house. But actually, do you as a family, have you mapped out what your clear rules and expectations are? And some of these things feel a little bit cheesy and like, well, why would we need to do that? And I don't need to do that for my other children. But again, let's go back to that kind of sense of the brain development and how some young people need more support than others in understanding that clarity around the rules and expectations. And again, if we're able to be consistent, if we're able to kind of give a consistent message around what expectations are, we're also able to then think proactively about, well, what are the consistent consequences? And what you can start doing is, and I know it's a crazy word to use, but you can start kind of doing this with your children in a problem solving way. You can start contracting it. You know, if you've got people in a calm space and a massive piece of paper, I'm telling you, it's amazing how much your kids love getting in on this to contribute to thinking about, well, what are the acceptable consequences for some of these behaviors? Because I think most of our young people do agree that those, a lot of the time, those behaviors are not acceptable. Again, preparing the environment to make it easier for kids to do the right thing. So if getting dressed in the morning is a real challenge, laying out clothes the night before, getting things ready, getting the school bag ready, getting, you know, things in the right place in your home so it's easier for your child to be and feel organized. Because we think about those organization skills, they don't necessarily come naturally to some young people. So just actually getting your clothes out of different drawers can feel like something that there's a real struggle with. And in the book, there's lots of examples of how you can think about how you set your family home up to provide the opportunity for your kids to do the right thing. Because actually, once you've got things in front of you in a certain way and you haven't got some of the kind of things that get in the way of doing the right thing, it's amazing how children then can be released from that additional pressure, and they can have the space and opportunity to do better than they might have done. Again, creating routines. We know if we're fitting in routines, and that's where difficulties around transitions and bedtime can be particularly helpful. We actually have a workshop on sleep. We're repeating a workshop on sleep. We know for young children, particularly young people with a diagnosis of ADHD, that sleep can be a real challenge. And that creates a challenge for us as parents. And if you've got older children in your household, you're probably getting used to the notion that you go to bed before them, and that's a challenge in itself. So us as parents not getting enough sleep has an impact on our well-being, but it definitely has an impact on our children's functioning. And we know that sleep, not getting enough sleep, actually affects young people's ability to keep their lid tightly down. We know when you're not getting enough sleep, your part of your brain, the downstairs brain, is much more sensitive and much more reactive. So have a look at the sleep podcast and the sleep workshop that we do. And again, planning your day realistically so you have enough time. And remember, you're allowed to get it wrong. You know, there's a lot of guilt about being a parent and not getting it right all of the time. It's really important. You're not going to get it right all the time. And I guess, you know, thinking about repair, opportunities for repair, and how much we can feel ashamed as parents, how much our children can feel ashamed of their behavior, and how being able to say sorry. You know, I have to say sorry to my kids a lot because I often overreact when I'm tired, when I'm stressed, when I've had enough. And, you know, saying sorry and accepting an apology from my children without giving them a lecture when they say sorry, because often we get into this habit, if our children say sorry to us,
Yeah.
we can then end up giving them a bit of a lecture of why that it was, you know, why went wrong. But just accepting that apology and using the repair moment as an opportunity to do some of that kind of thinking together about how we can get this differently, and your child learning that, you know, there is hope and that you do love and care about them. It's the behavior that's the challenge, but you dearly love them.
And that's what creates well-attached families. Sorry, Beth, and that's because they are the resilient families. And I think the thing about getting it wrong is you can't go backwards. You can only move forward. So the guilt trap holds you back. So, you know, I was saying in the talk earlier that current research and thinking says that we all have about 5 big family rows each week. It's quite normal behaviour in families. Holding on to the difficulty is the bit that actually starts to impact on your family. So it's being the peacemaker at some point and bringing your family back together is what will build your resilience.
I recorded some work with year 11s the other week in school and asked them what their top tips were to other young people and to parents, and they said every day is a new day. You know,
absolutely.
just to think every day is a new day, to kind of give you that sense of hope, really.
And the other thing we do is future forecast. If that, you know, they're 6 now, oh my gosh, what kind of adult are they going to be? And you can't future forecast. We don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. So it is that moment and that time and managing that day. And, you know, if you're getting through the day and you can make some improvements and you can feel that it's a better day as you move forward, that's going to be, you know, the best payout for you, really, and have the most positive impact.
And trying to find that space to incorporate quality time. It's really difficult, especially if you've got more than one child. But it can be as small as 5 minutes. And you know what? I mean, I'm often knackered at the end of the day and I don't have the energy to kind of engage in an activity. So you think in your head quality time involves me doing something with my child, but actually quite often my quality time with my children is sitting with them whilst they're doing their favoured activity, whether it's playing on Roblox or building something on Minecraft or watching Riverdale or all sorts of different things. But just me sitting alongside my child and taking a genuine interest, non-judgmental, which can be difficult when my daughter's doing things on TikTok, but a non-judgmental, curious interest in what they're doing. And that time you can literally feel your child beginning to soften and relax. And that's often the time if your child's not particularly cuddly, that your arms brush up against one another, and just that space can often be the time. You're not prompting anything, you're not asking any direct questions, but that can often be the time when your child will spontaneously tell you about something that's on their mind. So those moments can be really precious, and building that in to a point in the day, typically the end of the day, around your bedtime routine with your young person, can be a really helpful way to feel for you as a parent that you've had that positive time, but also for your young person, because that's a lot of the time that's what they're craving. Just the simplicity of you being interested in them, which is a real challenge when our brains are full of so much as parents. This is for you to think about with school and to share with school. The pathwaytosuccess.com has lots of resources for schools to think about how they can support developing executive functioning skills in their students. And, you know, if we're looking at the 6 to 10 age group, which a lot of you are in, these are really useful things for any young person in that age category. So again, have a look at that website, point your school in the direction of that website, and that will hopefully be helpful for them in thinking about helping your young person's needs be better understood and better met at school, so that their experience of school can be more positive, which can help them feel like they want to get to school in the morning or feel better able to have the opportunity for success in the school environment. Okay, we're over time, not by as much as earlier, but thank you for holding on, because you've probably got children who are screaming for attention and dinner and all sorts. But just really important to get the basics right. Keep your child's fuel tank replenished. Provide lots of opportunities for rewards. Do not feel bad about giving your child rewards for small positive behaviors you're seeing. Provide more opportunities for success. That was what will build confidence in your young person. That's what will build bravery to try new things, to get outside of their comfort zone. So providing that sense of doing well with tasks is just amazingly important for building confidence and a sense of self-esteem. There's a wonderful thing that we talk about with strength-based parenting, Leah Waters. That's in our parenting workshop, Building Resilience. I would really recommend you listen to that workshop. It's got loads more tips along these lines. Making sure and coming up with reachable goals with your children, making the goals together, making sure they're your children's goals, because they're going to want similar things to you. They might just be, you might have to just agree with, well, let's make it reachable, because sometimes our children's goals are way above what even we would expect. Providing enough frequent breaks, getting the energy pumped up, enough food, enough sleep, and enough exercise, which again can be difficult, and just kind of trying to encourage positive self statements. And the best way you can do that as a parent is to model it yourself. So a lot more talking out loud about the kind of, oh my goodness, I often do this, my kids must think I'm sort of do a lot of talking to myself, but I say, gosh, I've had a really tough day. I'm amazed I've made my way through the day. I've done really well, and I only let one ball drop today. But that kind of compassionate self-talk, us saying that aloud to our children, even being a bit playful, and I nearly lost it. I nearly flipped my lid earlier with you, but I'm really glad I managed to bring it back, because we've had we've had a really nice time this evening. I've really enjoyed reading with you. So telling your children about those moments that you enjoy with them, that you get pleasure out of. And really, our children come with so many talents and gifts, and often they get lost with these big behaviors. Kind of giving our children opportunity to be reminded about how much we value their talents and gifts is really important. We haven't got time to do that, naming a talent of your child, but just the very last slide now. Your relationship with your children is, what you're trying to build on here, because you're often that person who can help your young person bring their lid, feeling connected to you, but also giving them opportunities to develop those skills around problem solving, around frustration tolerance. Seeing you being able to do that is going to enable your children to be able to learn those skills and develop that. So choosing the right time to talk about things, absolutely critical, and a common challenge that you go marching after your children as they slam the bedroom door and want to have that discussion with them there and then, because this is completely inappropriate. Try and move away from that. Try and agree with your young person. Often I do work with families where we agree, when I'm feeling like this, I need to go to my room and have some space. And then in about 10 minutes, I'll probably calm down enough that I can come back downstairs, or whatever it might be. So have those conversations about what happens when you're getting to feel like that. Get your children more tuned into when they're beginning to feel like that, so that they can learn to take some kind of action to help them diffuse it. Again, taking this curious and empathic position and remaining calm, so important, because our children so quickly feel judged by adults, by others, and so that's that curiosity, not blaming, but really, and it's really difficult to do when you're flipping furious and you've had enough, but it can really make those conversations so much more honest and open, and give your child the time to get their lid firmly down, so that they're building those connections between their upstairs and downstairs brain, and they're learning to turn some of their feelings into words that make sense to them and to you. Again, biting your tongue, sometimes we don't give our children enough opportunity to have some really good ideas that we can try. So asking them, what I'm really stuck here. I don't know. I'm doing ABC. I'm really stuck. What can we do to help break this? And giving them an opportunity to come up with the ideas. So you're really trying to set your child up here for an opportunity for success, to be collaborative together. And as you think about going into adolescence, we think about moving towards coaching our children's rather than organizing them. And again, you're setting up the parameters for your relationship to be able to do this. Again, as many opportunities your children have to practice these skills, you have the opportunity to just demonstrate and model them the better. And this is the link to the really fantastic workshop on supporting under 11s with managing big feelings that I think will be really helpful for many of you. So this is a massive challenge for us as carers. It's emotionally exhausting. Often our own needs are not being met in our own lives. And so we're having to sometimes do this on empty. Some of our children's behaviours can be triggering for us. They can remind us of difficult points in our own life before. So it's really difficult for us to maintain our lid not being flipped, and learning to recognise that in ourselves and take some steps away, or get another person in our life, another adult, to help us in those moments can be really valuable. We may not have the support we need in our life. And all of these things can impact on our ability to model the skills we want our children to develop, to keep the volume down in our homes.
Yeah. And turn the worry mechanism off. You can, after you've had a difficult day with your child, you can spend your evenings ruminating on how wrong you got it and thinking about why that unraveled. And actually what you need to do is give yourself some repair time and some recovery time. So ruminating on those difficulties and those worries, maybe set aside some time to do that, and then decide that that's enough now. I need to have my downtime and my own relaxation, because it can often affect relationships then as well.
And I think we can't pour from an empty bucket. And sometimes as a parent, we often feel very selfish when we make decisions about looking after ourselves. Really simple things, actually, which, we would just kind of, before we had children, probably never consider that having a bath one night might feel rather selfish. Of course, it wouldn't be what you did all the time. But really prioritizing that oxygen mask first, filling up your own bucket so you've got the resources to do that, and asking for help when you need it and getting that support and help. And so this is where we're going to point you in the direction of lots of resources out there. There's lots of written resources that are available online, so you can click on any of these links. You'll all get sent this PowerPoint with all the links that you can click on. There's actually an online course run by Just One Norfolk, but actually it's available for you to just click on and do in your own time. You don't have to sign up for it, and that's all around thinking about some of those positive behaviour strategies. And I think for schools, there's Dr. Tina Ray does some really great help around thinking about transition. So, there's an opportunity for you here to do some information sharing with schools. A lot of the resources provided by the ADHD Foundation are really helpful for young people, even if those young people do not have ADHD. Some of the advice and guidance that is given for those young people will be really applicable for your young person too. And again, all of the advice and guidance we're giving you today will be helpful for any young person. So it doesn't, that your young person doesn't have to necessarily have challenging behaviour. You're going to have other siblings in your home who might not have challenging behaviour, but will still benefit from some of this guidance. There's a parent workshop for young people with ADHD and ASD thinking about managing difficult behaviour in November, run locally. Home Start in Suffolk. So this is for families on the call who may be from Suffolk. They offer support to parents. You can self-refer, you can get support and help, a phone call, someone to actually help you if you're really struggling. There's some behaviour safe at home courses, there's parenting courses, school nurses. If you're going to your school and asking them for input from the school nurse can be really helpful to think about some of these strategies for supporting your child at school. Some other website there, and Suffolk Family Carers, again, very active in this area. There's a phone number there. They provide advice and guidance as well as emotional support. And sometimes we absolutely need that. Sometimes we can't get it from a family member. Sometimes we can't get it from another adult in our household, and we just really need that person with that little bit of distance who can provide us with that support to help us fill up our own bucket and give us some hope and can just be there for us. And Suffolk Family Carers again run some fantastic workshops that you can sign up for free if you follow that link through Eventbrite. So there we go. We're 16 minutes over. We've only shaved 4 minutes off. Okay, for those of you who've managed to stay to the very end, thank you so much for your time tonight. we hope it's been useful, but we want to know how useful this is for you, because again, we do run these sessions again, and it kind of can help us refine our content. We apologize for going over time. We've tried to cover a lot, maybe too much, but we really hope that you found today useful, because we appreciate how precious your time is and how difficult a challenge that you've got as parents. It's one of the toughest
Absolutely.
jobs in the world. It's the thing that can, mean you can't get to sleep at night, and you struggle when you wake up in the morning with that feeling of wanting to get it right, wanting to have a good day. And so it's a really tough and lonely job, and quite often you
Absolutely.
feel like what's happening in your home isn't happening in other people's homes. You all get your school uniform on, your clothes on, you drive to work or school, and it looks like everybody's life. If you want to watch, I've been watching Motherland, and I just love that, because it really gives some reality on what I can
Absolutely.
relate so much to those characters.
Yeah.
So absolutely, thank you for today and for your feedback. And just one last thing from you to us, thank you so much, is just 2 things that you'll take away from today's session. We're probably going to have to shave off a bit from today's session, and sometimes we're asked to do condensed talks, so it'd be really helpful for us to know what are the 2 key things that you found most valuable today that you think you can take away and apply in your family life. That would be massively helpful to us. It's also helpful to you. We know about behaviour change. Behaviour change is a tricky thing, but we know that one of the things that encourages us to change our behaviour is being really concrete and setting ourselves, writing something down and setting ourselves an achievable goal. So if you can reflect on today's session, we've overloaded you with a lot of information. What stands out to you today that you feel has been really helpful today, that you think that is going to help you do something differently off the back of this call?
There's some good things there. So the guilt thing, not to reflect on your guilt. ABC charts sound like they've been quite helpful.
And one of the things we do a lot of thinking about in our other workshops is sitting with difficult feelings, and often we don't want our children to be in pain and distress or have to struggle with difficult feelings, but sadly it is a part of life, and we can get sucked into trying to rush our children away from some of these difficult feelings, particularly if we've had the experience of our children not managing those feelings themselves. So a lot of our workshops talk about thinking about how we can sit with our children's difficult feelings, and how that in itself is such a powerful thing for our children to experience, that they can then learn about tolerating difficult feelings. It's okay, I can manage this. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel angry. And that can be such a helpful thing for our children. It's tough for us. It's so tough for us because we don't want our children to be in pain or distress.
And sometimes these things have taken a while to manifest, so it's built over time. And I think sometimes people try new techniques, and initially your child might kick back because they're confused and say, "Oh no, that behaviour works for me." So don't be surprised if you be consistent with it and keep going, because you will feel the success.
Absolutely. Initially, you may get some kickback, and actually, in that book, the Calmer Happy Parenting book, it does talk about that. And my children often say, "Oh, you've read a book again, Mom." and sometimes you can find yourself doing some of these things, and it feels a bit cheesy, and it feels a bit like, why am I doing this? This just doesn't. It seems a bit too obvious. But it's amazing, because even when my children say, "Oh God, you've read another book, Mom, you're trying something out as you're experimenting on us," even if they say that, they still can't help themselves but to actually kind of respond to it, even they know that it's something I'm experimenting with on them.
It's like a new language. It takes time to understand. So that's my kind of analogy. It's a bit like saying, "Annie, I'm going to put you in an igloo and I expect you to be able to function. It will take me a while. I'll have to learn the new ways of being, and you and your children will have to learn the new ways of being. But it's worth the investment. And I wish all of you the very best, and I hope it's been useful today."
Absolutely. So thank you again for all of your time tonight. I think I've got some dinner waiting for me in the kitchen. I've mastered the art of getting my 16-year-old cooking. So nights like tonight, it's like Actually, my daughter did prepare the meal tonight.
So you're lucky. I'm halfway through cooking my lasagna, Beth. So
lasagna is such hard work. Anyway, it's been lovely to present to you today. Thank you for your interaction. I think there's a lot in the chat which I will have a look at now. Take care. Have a good evening, and don't give up. And we look forward to seeing you in some of our other workshops to come.
Take care all. Bye bye now.